5.
Thank you, Tim. Shall we start?
Yep.
Good afternoon. Welcome to the meeting of the Northern Planning Committee. I am Councillor Paul Wynne, Chair of the committee. I'm obliged to inform you that this is a meeting is being live streamed, so members of the public will be able to hear the audio of the meeting and view the papers shown on the screen. This meeting is being held using remote technology, and should any committee members experience technical difficulties during the meeting, they should immediately contact the designated IT officer on the number they have already been supplied with. Everyone is requested to mute their microphones unless asked to speak. Please only use the chat function to indicate the desire to speak, but nothing else, so that it is clear who is asking to speak, and the debate has to be heard by those listening to the audio feed. Members are asked to ensure that they are present if through the meeting, as you cannot vote on any item if you have not heard all the debate. As chair, I will interpret the council's existing standing orders in light of the requirements of the remote participation, with advice from the monitoring officer prior to making a ruling. At the start of the meeting, I will ask members of the committee to confirm their presence and any disclosable pecuniary interests they have, if any of the items on the agenda. I will ask everyone that speaks during the meeting, including members of the committee and officers, to introduce themselves each time before they speak. This is so those listening know who is speaking. Members are reminded to close any pecuniary interest in any matters to be discussed which is not included in the register of interests, and leave the meeting by turning off the camera, muting their microphone prior to the matter being discussed. Confirm your presence, please, and any interests. I'm Paul Wynne, Chairman. I have no interests. Councillor Roy Aldercroft.
Yes, Roy Aldercroft, present and representing Market Drayton East. No interests.
Thank you, Councillor. Councillor Nicholas Bardsley. Councillor Nicholas Bardsley.
Apologies, Chairman. Nick Bardsley, Councillor for Wrighton and Bastchurch, and I have no pecuniary interests.
Thank you, Councillor. Councillor Pauline D.
Hello, I'm Councillor Pauline D, and I represent Wem Urban, Wem Rural, and Wixel, and I have no pecuniary interests.
Thank you, Councillor. Councillor Vince Hunt.
Thank you, Chairman. Councillor Vince Hunt, who represents Oswestry West. I don't have a pecuniary interest, but I do have an interest in the shape of potential public perception of bias, both as a member of Cornovii Steering Committee, but also as a reasonably good friend of one of the principal objectors. So I will leave the meeting for item 5 on for those reasons.
Thank you, Councillor. Councillor Pamela Mosley.
Pam Mosley here. I represent Monkmore in Shrewsbury, I have an interest which is not pecuniary, but for item 7, there's been an objection lodged by the Shropshire Playing Fields Association. I sit on that organisation as a town council, Shrewsbury Town Council member, but I've had no involvement or discussions with regard to this representation with other members or officers at all, so I feel I'm still able to take part.
Thank you for that, Councillor. Councillor David Vasmere.
Councillor David Vasmere here. I'm also a twin hatter.
Okay, thank you. Councillor Joyce Barrow.
Councillor Joyce Barrow, representing St Oswald Ward. I have no pecuniary interests.
Thank you, Councillor. Please can the officers now confirm their presence?
Just a second.
Sorry, Paul. I think you've forgotten me.
And me.
Oh, hang on a second. Hang on. Right. Don't know why your names aren't down. Okay. Councillor Gerald Aiken.
Yeah, Councillor Gerald Aiken represented Whitchurch Rural, which includes Ash and Tilstock, and I have a peculiar interest in item number 8, Paul's Moss Community Room, and I will not be speaking on that subject.
Thank you, Councillor. And the other one, I'm sorry.
Councillor Nat Green.
You were down, yeah. Sorry, Nat.
Yes, I'm councillor for Quarry and Coton Hill in Shrewsbury. On item 5, to avoid a perception of bias, I will not be taking part in the discussion or voting on that item. And also on item 8, the same as Councillor Mosley, I'm as a twin-hatted member of Shrewsbury Town Council, and also I sit on the board of the Shropshire Playing Fields Association as a Shropshire councillor. But again, as per Pam Mosley, I consider that I have not taken part in any previous discussions on this, and that therefore I can take part in this discussion and the voting. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor. Right, please can the officers now confirm their presence, starting with planning officers?
Philip Molyneux, Principal Planner.
Kelvin Hall, Principal Planner.
Tim Rogers, Development Management Team Manager.
Ian Kilby, Head of Planning Services.
Mark Wootton, Highways.
Thank you. I think that covers all the officers. Committee officer.
Shelley Davis, Committee Officer.
Thank you, Shelley. Solicitor.
Miranda Garrard, Solicitor.
Thank you, Miranda. Right, I shall now turn to the items on the agenda. Just before we do that, I'd like to inform all the public that item 6 is being withdrawn. So if you have an interest, we don't think we're going to be sitting there waiting for it. Sorry about that. Okay, so we'll move to first on the agenda, apologies.
Shelley Davis, Committee Officer. Apologies have been received from Councillor Mark Jones and Councillor Keith Roberts. Councillor Joyce Barrow will be substituting.
Thank you, Shelley. Item 2, minute. We confirm the minutes of the North Planning Committee meeting held on the 3rd of March 2020. I move that the minutes of the previous Northern Planning Committee meeting held on the 3rd of March 2020 are circulated with the agenda papers be signed as a correct record. Can I have a seconder, please?
Seconded, Roy Allcroft.
Thank you, Roy. I will now accept these minutes as a true record unless anyone else indicates differently.
Councillor Wynne, may I please abstain? I wasn't present.
Thank you, Councillor Barrow. Item 3, public questions time.
Shelley Davis, Committee Officer. There are none.
Thank you, Shelley. 4, disclosable pecuniary interest. This has been dealt with during the initial roll call of the meeting. Now you're turning to the substantive items I will be inviting the planning officers to present them before dealing with the public speaking part of the meeting, and then asking for comments from members of the committee. So we move now to item 5, Glovers Meadows, Oswestry, Shropshire.
Chair, at this point, I will leave this virtual meeting. Thank you.
Thank you,
Chair, myself also, that's Councillor Green.
Thank you very much. Okay, so can we kick off with that one? Thank you.
Are you ready, Chair, for me to present?
Yes, please.
Right. Thank you, Chairman. Philip Molyneux, Principal Planner speaking. The application is for change of use of land to provide business-based residential accommodation for a local family of travelling show people on land at Glovers Meadow, Oswestry. The site is located just off Maidesbury Road and was formerly in use as a recycling centre. And since this use has had planning permission for use in relation to display and sale of caravans. The application is in relation to a family of travelling show people who have been based on a site at Ivanheath Primary School, St Martin's. And this site has been subject to a temporary plan permission for such use granted by committee, whistle a more permanent site is found for them. Updates. Members' attention is drawn to the update, which is item number 1 on the update sheet, and the letter of comment from the member of the public. I have nothing further to add to that as indicated on the update sheet. We've also received this morning a late representation in relation to potential land contamination issues. This issue is covered in section 6.7 of the officer's report, and further was covered in the previous planning permission for change of use from a recycling to caravan storage and sales. As such, we have no further comment in relation to this late representation. First slide, please. Application site is outlined in red and is in a primary industrial part of the town. The land outlined in blue is other land in the applicant's control. Block plan, next slide please. This indicates the proposal of five static caravans to be used by the family as outlined in paragraph 6.36 of the report. The family status as a travelling show people is firmly established as a result of the previous approvals for the site at St Martin's I referred to earlier. Next slide, please. The application also includes further landscaping to the western side of the site, as indicated on this slide, down this side here. There's also storage area here where I'm indicated now for the showground equipment, if and when required, as obviously most of the time it is on the road going from one fair to another. Next slide, please. Photograph indicating the entrance to the site from the adjacent public highway. It's also noted Shropshire Council Highways raised no objections. Next slide, please. This is looking into the site off the access road. There's a sign there advertising the caravans that were previously on site to the previous planning approval. And the final slide. This is a slide taken showing the wider area and for members to note the significant landscaping that already screens the site. It is noted that there are no objections to this application from any of the statutory consultees as outlined in the report to committee, and while the Town Council do not raise any objections, it is acknowledged 15 letters of objections have been received from members of the public, plus the late representation received this morning. The key reasons as outlined in paragraph 421 of the officer's report. It is considered that all these issues have been adequately addressed. In conclusion, the family concerned clearly are classed as travelling show people, and a permanent solution to their needs for an appropriate site to reside on is required. It is considered this site is suitable and will have no significant impacts in consideration of the surrounding area, which includes reference to the historic environment, landscaping considered acceptable with further mitigation as offered, as discussed earlier. It is also noted that the site has permission granted for use in relation to caravan storage and sales. Residential amenity issues considered acceptable. Potential land contamination and drainage matters considered acceptable as discussed. With no implications to highways and transportation matters, it is also noted there have been no complaints received as a result of the occupation of this family at its site in St. Martin's. However, clearly this site is not a permanent solution to their needs. The recommendation is therefore one of approval, subject to conditions as outlined in Appendix 1 attached to the report. That concludes my presentation, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Philip. Moving on now to any public speakers. There aren't any on this application, so therefore we can move straight on. I will now ask members of the committee for their comments. Please indicate on the chat function if you wish to speak. Please remember that when asked to speak, members should unmute microphones, state their name and remute on completion. The solicitor will let me know who is next to speak. Do we have anybody?
Yeah, yes, Chair. Miranda Garrett, solicitor speaking. Councillor Bardsley has requested to speak.
Thank you. Councillor Bardsley.
Thank you, Chairman. Nick Bardsley, Councillor for Wrighton and Baschurch. I have questions, really. First of all, a simple point in relation to the number of caravans. The officer's report talks about 5, and 5 are shown on the landscaping plan and the block plan. But I noticed that the condition attached, or the proposed condition attached to the grant of planning permission, if that's the committee's decision, talks about no more than 10. Now, there seems to be quite a discrepancy there. I'm assuming that that is to cover the situation where there are visiting touring caravans, but could the officers clarify that point about numbers, because it does seem to me there's quite a significant difference between 5 caravans and 10.
To you, Chair.
Thank you, Nick. Yeah, Philip, if you could respond to that, please.
Thank you, Philip Molyneux, Principal Planner. Yes, your assumption is correct, Councillor. It's 5 static caravans as outlined in the report in paragraph 6.36, and touring caravans for if and when they're off-site.
So there could be 10?
Correct.
Right. And where will they go? Somewhere else on the site?
They're not permanent. They can be off-site when they're travelling off-site with their fare. They're taking them with them to visit all different parts of the country. So they're not going to be permanently stationed on site. Where the caravans shown on the proposed plan are the permanent ones that'll be on site on a permanent basis.
Well, forgive me just for pursuing this point for a moment. And it's perhaps a question for Miranda. What is the definition of residential as opposed to people who might be there for several weeks but are not permanent. Where does a visitor become residential, and what control do we have over the number of additional caravans over and above the 5 that are specified?
Miranda?
Thank you, Chair. Miranda Garrod speaking. I think this is probably more of a question for the planning officer. Really, I think what the planning officer was saying is it's not that they're visiting people coming on the site with the touring caravans, but it's the touring caravans owned by the family, as my understanding, that effectively come back to the site when they're not on the road with the fairground equipment. So I think it's that those other touring caravans come back. I think the planning officer will correct me if I'm wrong, but it's the residential ones that are the permanent fixtures are the static caravans.
Thank you, Miranda. Are you satisfied with that, Councillor Bardsley?
Yeah, can I pursue another point in relation to the proposed drainage works? Because it seems to be there's going to be quite a lot of surface water and foul drainage required to deal with. It's in paragraph 6.2.5. There's quite a long list. There's hot and cold water supply, electricity supply, toilets, bathroom, shower room, kitchen, dining area. All that seems to me to require quite a bit of construction and quite a bit of drainage work. And yet we're told that the surface that's there now won't be disturbed in any way. And I can't quite reconcile how we can do all this construction work and drainage work without breaking into the surface. And I'd just like to be reassured that you're not thereby, because somewhere in the report, and forgive me, I forget which paragraph it is, we're saying that there's no risk of land contamination. That's right. I think it's paragraph 6.7.2. The hard standing will remain acting as a barrier to end any underlying potential contamination. I can't square that with all this work that's going to be taking place to provide the amenity block and all those other things, hot and cold water supply, etc., that's referred to in paragraph 6.2.5. Could I have some reassurance on that, please?
Yeah.
Can I ask you, Philip, to respond to that?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Philip Mullen, you speaking. Yes, I'd like to draw members' attention to condition number 3 attached in Appendix 1 with regards to surface of a scheme of surface and foul water drainage. I hear what the local member is saying with regards to potential land contamination. That has been further looked into since the report was written, and land contamination was not considered an issue, and surveys were done when the site had changed of use from its recycling to caravan storage. As such, the council's drainage officer is happy with drainage issues and recommends the condition as attached in Appendix 1.
Thank you, Philip.
Yeah, sorry, Chairman, I'll shut up in a minute. I think there's a bit of a difference between storage of caravans. People aren't living there in the caravans that are stored. People are going to be living in these static caravans. So I don't think it's quite the same issue with respect. I wouldn't have thought there was any issue with storing caravans because by definition people aren't in them. People are going to be living in these static caravans, and if there is any risk of contamination, then the point about the site being sealed because of the hard standing, I mean that sealing is surely going to have to be broken into to provide the drainage and all the other things that we say are required.
Philip, you'd like to respond to that? You're on mute, Philip.
The previous planning use of the site, or the current one rather, is for caravan sales and storage. This issue was looked at extensively as a result of that planning approval, and there were no issues of concern. The officer has referred to the site being sealed. Yes, I acknowledge drainage is required. However, it is considered that condition number 3, as attached in Appendix 1, will adequately address this matter prior to drainage taking place on site.
Thank you, Philip.
Thank you, Chairman.
All right, Councillor Bardsley.
Yep, thank you very much.
Has anybody else indicated to speak?
Yes, Chair, Miranda Garrod speaking. The next requested speaker is Councillor Barrow.
Thank you, Councillor Barrow.
Thank you, Chairman. I might be a bit disjointed because I've been writing notes, but what I have written is that as Philip has said, there are no objections from the Town Council, Historic England, Archaeology, Public Protection or Ecology. 6.1.5 says that the government's policy for traveller sites says that local planning authorities should have regard to the need that travelling show people have mixed-use yards to allow residential accommodation and space for storage of equipment. Finding such sites is immensely difficult, as I'm sure officers will say, and this particular site seems absolutely ideal. It's also very close to the highway, which is one of the things that is being sought. Any potential site for travelling show people needs to have good access to the highway network and a large open space within which to accommodate the vehicles and equipment. I have to say, I've been contacted by a couple of businesses which are adjacent to this particular site with their concerns, which are actually in the report. And I think they're all concerns that anyone would have. But I feel that the report actually mitigates all those things. I think screening will mitigate concerns expressed about how the site will look. But I have to say, having driven many times past the site that the Stokes family are on in St Martin's, it is always immaculate. It is extremely tidy. Nothing is out of place. The other thing is, of course, as this used to be a recycling centre, enormous numbers of vehicles used to go in and out of there, because I know one of the concerns is that maybe children or people will be walking on and off the site into town. But there is nothing in comparison to the number of people that were using the recycling centre and people who walk from the businesses into town for lunch, etc. The Stokes family are a well-known Oswestry family and they have an excellent reputation, and I just think and feel that this is a very good site for them to be relocated on. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Barrow. Has anybody else indicated?
Yes, Chair. Councillor Pam Mosley has requested to speak.
Thank you, Councillor Mosley.
Thank you, Pam Mosley here. I had two questions, but Councillor Barrow has been very helpfully answering one of them about the condition of the site where the Stokes family live now, and has offered reassurance that they do keep a very tidy site, which ought to reassure some of the local businesses who have expressed concerns. My other query was there's reference made to a 2.5 metre high acoustic barrier going in, but I couldn't see anything on the plans where that were to be. Could you provide information on that, please?
Chair here, Councillor Paul Wynne. Philip Molyneux, could you enlighten us?
Thank you, Chair. I'm sorry, I'll look into that matter now. Which condition?
It wasn't a condition, it was reference
No,
made to
it isn't
it.
subject. We're going to check in the conditions first. It isn't. Can we go back to slides, please? It'd be the site is in a primary industrial area of Oswestry. Therefore, the acoustic barrier would have been recommended as a result of adjacent land use. If we could go through the slides, please. I'm not sure where it's referred to. Next slide, please. Can we stop on the second slide, please?
Reference is made to it in paragraph 6.4.5, but I couldn't see anything on the plans to indicate where it might be.
Right, it's in reference to one of the adjacent boundaries with regards the adjacent land use from a particular business, where it's been recommended as part of a noise assessment, this 2.5 metre tall acoustic barrier is sited. Officers consider that acceptable because, as members will note in the photographs, this side of the site is well screened with existing vegetation. Because the block plan doesn't indicate where it's going.
Thank you, Philip. Is that okay, Councillor Mosley?
Go to the. Can we first go to the photographs, please? Next slide. In any case, condition number 6 covers it. The slides aren't coming up with the photograph. Next one, please. Right there. If you note now, during my presentation, I indicated how it was on the western side where additional landscaping is offered. That's towards the highway as passing by. The site adjacent to the adjacent land uses is quite well screened with existing vegetation, and it's proposed in one of these sites to put in this barrier, which is referred to in condition number 6. With regards to the noise assessment carried out by the applicant's noise expert.
Thank you. I was interested because obviously something that big, it doesn't say how long, it says it's 2.5 metres high. I was interested in where it would be. I do agree that the site is very well screened, apart from that sort of gappy area where near the main road, which there is additional planting, hedgerow planting proposed. I think it's a very well screened site. I was just interested in where the barrier was to go. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Mosley. Just to confirm with Councillor Mosley, it does seem a very well screened site. Good photographs. It does seem well screened, and with more planting, I think it'll be very well screened. Are there any more indicators?
Yes, Chair. Councillor Oldcroft has indicated.
Thank you, Miranda. Councillor Oldcroft.
Yeah, Councillor Oldcroft here. Yeah, I mean, I agree totally with what's been said by the Councillor Barrow. It's well hidden. There's no objections. The Town Council don't object. Okay, I know there's the written objections, but there are no objections from officers or anybody like that. It meets the terms of traveller policy. The family themselves are of good character, so I know it's going to stay tidy. It's a good site with good access. I propose we support the application.
Thank you.
Grant permission.
Chair
Subject to conditions laid down by officers there.
Yeah, we just want to see if there's any more who have indicated to speak.
No, Chair, there's no additional speakers. Councillor Barrow has indicated she would wish to second that.
Thank you very much, because my next question was, if there's no more speakers, can I please have a proposer, which we have, and we have a seconder.
Sorry, I second. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Barrow. Right, we will now take the vote. The solicitor will read out the names of the committee present and entitled to vote on this item, and then confirm the result of the vote. I just remind people to switch off their microphones if they're not speaking.
Thank you, Chair. The proposal that has been proposed and seconded is to approve the development in accordance with the officer recommendation. Councillor Paul Wynne, are you for or against?
I'm for.
Councillor Oldcroft?
I'm for.
Councillor Bardsley?
Abstain.
Councillor Dakin?
For.
Councillor D?
For.
Councillor Mosley?
For.
Councillor Barrow?
For.
Councillor Vasma?
For.
Thank you, Chair. That is 7 votes for and 1 abstention.
Thank you very much. Confirm the outcome. Yes, that has gone with the officer's recommendation for approval. Right, item 6, as I said, has been withdrawn. So we'll move straight on to item 7. Car park, the Shire Hall, Abbey Foregate.
Chair, if it's all right, can I just announce, because members of the public can only hear, that I'm now back into this meeting, so they know I'm here and are going to listen to the whole thing.
Thank you, Councillor Hunt.
Yes, me also. That's Councillor Green. I've now returned to the meeting.
Thank you, Councillor Green. Okay, so right, we're on item 7 now, and can the planning officer introduce themselves and present this item, please?
Thank you, Chair. Kelvin Hall, Principal Planner. This is an application for the variation of a condition on an existing temporary planning permission for additional car parking spaces at the Shire Hall to allow its retention until February 2022. Next slide, please. The site is outlined in red, and it's located adjacent to the main staff car parking area at the Shire Hall, which is to the south. There's a sports field to the west, a bowling green to the north, and residential properties to the east. Next slide, please. This is a slide showing the layout of the site as existing. It is accessed via the existing car park to the south via a ramp, and it provides 50 car parking spaces. So in terms of background, the planning permission was granted in 2018 for a change of use of former tennis courts at the Shire Hall to form additional car parking space for council staff for a temporary period of 2 years. Its use as a car park commenced in summer 2018. The permission was temporary to allow time for the council to prepare and implement a full car parking strategy and travel plan for the Shire Hall. Work is underway to develop this strategy, and this has included carrying out an independent survey to investigate staff commute and business travel habits. In addition, a project team has been set up to review and set out options for future travel and parking needs, and to implement more agile working practices, which may reduce parking demand on site in the future. The current application then seeks permission to retain the additional car parking area for a further 2 years to enable the completion of this review and strategy. There have been no objections from the Town Council, from Drainage, Highways or the Parks and Recreation teams, and no comments have been raised by local residents. An objection has been raised by the Shropshire Playing Fields Association, and their concerns are set out in para 4.2.2 of the committee report on pages 33 to 35. Their concerns include the loss of community open space and the fact that there are no proposals for its replacement. These comments have been addressed in the committee report. In para 6.2.3, the report notes that at present there is no demand for the site to operate as a sports facility. Nevertheless, the current application is for a temporary period only, and the area could revert back to a tennis court at the end of this temporary period if required. In conclusion, officers are of the view that the benefits of the proposal in meeting the current demand for parking and reducing on-street parking outweigh the limited harm associated with the temporary loss of former tennis courts, whilst a full travel strategy is being prepared, As such, officers recommend that planning permission is granted to allow the retention of the car park until February 22. That ends my presentation.
Thank you, Calvin. This is where we have public speakers. There are no public speakers, so we can move on. I will now ask members of the committee for their comments. Please indicate on the chat function if you wish to speak. Please remember that when asked to speak, members should unmute microphones, state their name and remute on completion. So I'm asking members to come forward, please.
Chair, the first request to speak is from Councillor Vasma.
Thank you, Councillor Vasma.
Yes, Councillor David Vasma speaking. I would like to propose an amendment to the officer's recommendation. I think that we should only allow this for 1 year. My reason is clearly that this is a temporary measure. I personally regretted the loss of the tennis courts, although I appreciated they were not used when this was first discussed. And I think any loss of recreational space in the town is to be regretted. Secondly, I think we've already had 2 years for a strategy to develop on this, and I think another 2 years is too long. I think we need to get on with this, and I think a 1 year deadline would be helpful to get the travel strategy sorted out. But the other factor, which of course officers presumably couldn't have foreseen, is COVID-19 and the impact this is likely to have on the need for parking space at Shire Hall. I think after this coronavirus problem is sorted out, then there will be a less need for car parking space in the town hall and the Shire Hall because of the number of people who will be working from home. So I think that really what we ought to be doing is saying yes to this, but only allow it for 1 year as opposed to 2.
Right, just before we go any further, thank you, Councillor Vasma. Just before we go any further, can I ask the planning officer any response to that?
The Kelvin Hall principal planner. The point is noted. If granted in line with the officer recommendation, it will be a requirement that the use ceases in February 2022. Therefore, by granting it today wouldn't be quite a 2 year period. It will be a few months less than that, around about 20 months I would expect. So it's not quite 2 years. Which is, slightly more in line with Councillor Vasma's suggestion. I'll just make that point.
Thank you for that, Calvin. Are there anybody else indicated to speak?
Yes, Chair. The next speaker is Councillor Green.
Thank you, Councillor Green.
Thank you, Chair. Yes, I firstly want to support what Councillor Vasma has suggested. The council's already had 2 years to come up with this parking strategy, and I think it needs to get a move on. And while I hear what the officer says that yes, it's less than what's being offered is in effect less than 2 years, but I'd also like to point out that in this less than 2 year period, are we going to find ourselves back at the same place where we were, and with yet another application for an extension for 2 years? And I think not only would I like to support Councillor Vasma's recommendation, but also I'd like to have it noted that this really is in effect, the last chance for the council to pull its finger out and get this parking strategy sorted out. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Green. Are there any more indications for speakers here?
Yes, Chair. The next one is Councillor Barrow, who indicated she had a question.
Thank you, Councillor Barrow.
Thank you. I'd like to ask Councillor, Mr. Molyneux, how long ago was it that it was last used as a tennis court? I know it does say in the papers. What was the usage like when it was being used? Because I have to say, in all the years I've been at Shire Hall, I've never seen it used, but it might be that I'm there at the wrong time of day. And my other question would have been pretty much what David Vasmer said. Given what's happening with COVID, I do foresee in the future that a lot more of us will be having meetings like this. And I wonder whether actually I should support Councillor Vasmer in what he's saying about a year, because I think things will be changing and we won't have that need. But I'll listen to what everyone else has got to say. Thank you.
Councillor Barrow. Any more?
Chair, did you want to ask the planning officer to come back on that before we take the next speaker, or do you want me to ask for the next speaker?
Yeah, is it going to be Kelvin or is it going to be Philip?
Mr. Chair, can I defer to Kelvin, please, as principal planner he's presenting this application, please?
Kelvin.
Thank you, Chair. Kelvin Hall, principal planner. The original application for this change of use came forward in 2017, and the committee report at that time mentioned that it had not been in use as a tennis court for more than 5 years. So that was 3 years ago. I've personally worked at the Shire Hall for many years, and I've seen it used a handful of times, but certainly not in recent years. In terms of the COVID-19 issue, I think this will impact upon on the way that people work, I'm sure, in the future, with the Shire Hall effectively being closed and home working and taking over. And I'm sure that this will influence the way that the travel strategy will be going ahead in future, and therefore I can't see that we necessarily want to, notwithstanding the points that we need to get on with the strategy, that I'm not sure that we should necessarily be restricting that down to less than 2 years. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Kelvin. Have there anybody else been indicated to speak?
Yes, Chair, the next request is Councillor Mosley.
Thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you, Pam Mosley speaking. Yes, I agree with Councillor David Vasmer's proposal for 1 year. My understanding was that it's not good planning practice to have serial temporary permissions, because if there are going to be that many of them, there's a danger it will turn into a permanent with little difficulty. With regard to the use of the tennis courts, I never used them, but from memory, they were in a pretty poor state. So it's a question of saying there's no demand. I think it's because they weren't terribly attractive and hadn't been kept up to an appropriate standard. My thoughts on the COVID situation, I'd already considered that there will be a change in how people work, I think, beyond the lockdown period. And that will obviously be a part of the travel strategy as and when it's finally sorted out, which is well behind now. 2 other points about how this proposal fits in with other Shropshire Council policies. One is climate change. We have adopted the climate change strategy and are working on that. And of course, this has an impact on that with carbon fuel use. And the other one is encouraging people to exercise, which the council does very regularly. It helps health and well-being. It would be both the health and well-being of staff and possibly the community were these tennis courts to be restored. And I would like to see that happen. I would not like to see this become a permanent fixture. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Mosley. Any more indications?
Yes, Chair, Councillor Hunt.
Thank you, Councillor Hunt.
Thank you, Chair. Councillor Hunt. One question really, and well, 2 questions, I guess. First of all, obviously, the agenda item that we have in front of us is a proposal for, as the officer has told us, slightly under 2 years. Are we able to make a change like that on a planning application? Fundamentally, on other planning applications, we can't make changes if we believe we can find better ways of doing things. I've always been told we have to deal with what's in front of us. So if the answer on, and I am not unsympathetic to what other members have said, should that be the case and we have to deal with what's in front of us, could we put in a condition that says that it will be returned as tennis courts sooner than 2 years, should as a result of the current climate and change in working practice, could we condition it that it will be returned to being a tennis court sooner than that, should it prove no longer to be needed?
Can I just?
Thank you, Chair.
I can't get the hand so that I can be called upon to speak. Can you hear me now?
Yes, we can. Thank you, Councillor.
If Councillor Hunt now is making that proposal, I would second that.
Can I just go back to the solicitor, please, Chair here? Go back to the solicitor for guidance on this one. Did Councillor Vesmere put a proposal up to start with? I can't quite remember. Proposal or not? Or, yeah.
I think that he in fact did, Chair. Miranda Gerard, solicitor speaking. Also, I'm not entirely clear that Councillor Hunt made a proposition. He was in effect asking a question as to whether we could alter the application and by way of changing the condition. I think I can advise you that you're not actually fundamentally redesigning the scheme or anything by altering it. What you would be doing is changing the condition, because there is a condition on the permission that limits it for a time period, and it's actually got a date on it. So you are at liberty, councillors, to change a condition, a proposed condition. Councillor Vesmere, I think, did propose that a 1-year consent was given, and I think that was supported by the next councillor to speak, who was Councillor Green. However, they both talked about 1 year. Now, the condition, to be precise, the condition actually has a date, and it's set up to the 28th of February 2022. So for the purposes of precision, my advice to members was that you should have a date so that it's clear, obviously, when the time period would end. So if you're talking about a year from today, then we'd need to put that date on it, because obviously if you took a year off the proposed condition, then you would actually in fact be granting less than a year from now. So, Chair, my advice is you might want to just go back to the proposer, Councillor Vesmere, and ask him what is precisely his proposal. My advice with regard to the alternate condition that Councillor Hunt was suggesting, if the Councillor Vesmere's suggestion wasn't possible, was that actually that would probably lack the precision needed to be an acceptable condition, because it was sort of return to tennis courts if it's no longer needed, and I think that would be who decides whether it's needed and when. So that would probably lack precision to be acceptable.
Thank you for your advice there, Miranda. Can I go back to Dee? Has anybody else indicated to speak, Miranda?
No, Councillor Barrow's indicating that she has a question, but I think I've probably answered the question in terms of she asked what can we do legally. I would just ask all councillors simply to leave the chat to just requests to speak. If you want to ask a question, just indicate you wish to speak and then ask the question for the public to hear.
Thank you. Do you need to ask that question, Councillor Barrow?
No, it was answered, and thank you for the advice, Miranda.
Thank you, Councillor Barrow. Right, moving to David Vesmere. Councillor David Vesmere. Are you prepared to give a definite date with your condition?
Yes, if I can propose that we have a year, give it a year from today, would that be possible? Okay. So May 27th or something next year.
Okay, so that's your proposal to change that condition and approve it. And can we have the seconder from Councillor Green? Are we happy with that?
I'm happy with that. Thank you.
Thank you very much. So there's no more speakers.
Chair, it's Miranda Gerard speaking. Could the planning officer just comment, please, before you put that to the vote? He has just requested to do so.
Oh, thank you, Miranda. Yeah. Kelvin.
Thank you, Chair. Kelvin Hall. Just a point to note that the description of the application is to vary the condition to allow an extension in the temporary permission until February 2022. Therefore, it's specified in the description and also in the proposed condition. So under the proposal, both would presumably have to be amended to make it a clear permission. Thank you.
Thank you. Can we go back for advice from the solicitor?
That's correct, Chair. The permission that's granted would need to indicate that it's a permission to vary condition 1 to allow for an extension until July 2021 as per the proposal. So that the actual permission would need to state that on its face as well as the condition.
Right, May 21, wasn't it?
Did I not say May 2021?
Yeah.
Yeah. So you changed the description of the development to include that date.
Right. If Councillor Green and Vasmir are happy with that.
Yes, I'm happy with that.
I'm happy with that.
Thank you. So we have a proposer and a seconder. So right. So we will now take the vote. The solicitor will read out the names of the committee members present and entitled to vote on this item, and then confirm the result of the vote.
Thank you, Chair. The proposal is, as you've heard, to grant consent until the 27th of May 2021. Councillor Wynne, are you for or against?
For.
Councillor Oldcroft?
For.
Councillor Bardsley? Councillor Bard, thank you. Councillor Dakin?
Against.
Councillor D?
For.
Councillor, thank you.
Yeah.
Councillor Green?
For.
Councillor Hunt?
For.
Councillor Mosley?
For, sorry.
Thank you. Councillor Barrow?
For.
Councillor Vasma?
For.
Thank you, Chair. That is 9 for and 1 against.
Thank you for that. So that has gone with the officer's recommendation for approval with a condition on that it is up on the 27th of May 2021. So that has been passed. Now we can move to item 8, which is Paul's Moss Community Room, Paul's Moss, Whitchurch. Can I ask the planning officer to introduce themselves and present this item, please?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Philip Molyneux, Principal Planner, presenting this application. Right, the application is made in full for redevelopment, which includes conversion of the Paul's Moss House to form a cafe, community hub and flats, construction of 71 sheltered residential apartments, erection of a health centre building, landscaping, which includes some removal of trees, formation of car parking spaces and alterations to the existing vehicle access at Paul's Moss, Whitchurch. Members will be aware of this site and previous applications for development. And this application is similar to the previous application approved by committee on the 15th of October 2019. This is now subject to a judicial review, and councillors are advised not to treat the previous application as a material consideration in favour of granting permission. Members' attention is drawn to the update sheet and the extensive late representations received. I'll just run through them. The first one is from Whitchurch Allotment and Community Orchard Association, which members will note the key issues raised in the letter and officers' comments. There have been additional representations received from members of the public, 4 at the time of the printing of this update sheet late yesterday afternoon. Issues covered are addressed in the relevant section. And finally, there's a letter of objection or comment being received from a local member, Councillor Tom Biggins, on transportation issues. I'm going to ask the highway manager to comment on this later during my presentation. Finally, the update sheet refers to a letter of objection received from a local resident, Eleanor Cooper. This raises a number of issues. These issues have been looked at. I did discuss and consult with the council's tree officer yesterday, and the conclusions reached are as indicated on the update sheet. We have also, since the publication of the update sheet, received 3 further letters of objections from members of the public. I'll run through these individually so that it's clear on the conclusions drawn. The first one is again from Mrs. Eleanor Cooper. She's raising concerns with regarding light pollution. This issue is covered in condition 3 attached to in Appendix 1. The next one is from a neighbour with regards concerns about drainage and tree protection on site. Again, this is from Eleanor Cooper. Both these matters are covered in conditions attached to the in Appendix 1. Condition number 4 on drainage, and condition number 6 refers to tree protection plan. What her concerns were with regards to a holly tree on site and that it could potentially be destroyed as a result of drainage. We do not share those concerns. The final letter of objection received from Mrs. Julia Gallagher refers to highway matters, and Whistle, it is noted the Shropshire Council Highways Office Manager raises no objections subject to conditions as attached in Appendix 1. I'm going to now defer to the Highway Officer for him to respond on the late representation we received from Councillor Tom Biggins, as I touched on earlier, and then I'll resume my presentation after Mark has made comment. Thank you.
Thank you, Philip. Thank you, Mark.
Through you, Chair. Sorry, I'm just need to change my computer. There we go. The letter dated the 24th of May from Councillor Biggins sets out the parking provision for the Paul's Moss development for a medical centre and extra care apartments is inadequate, and as a result would result in indiscriminate parking in locality. Councillor Biggins indicates a number of other planning permissions in Shropshire and Telford and Wrekin and their respective parking levels. Councillor Biggins cites that parking provision for the medical facility should be provided at 4 spaces per consulting room, and therefore on that basis alone the medical facility should provide some 84 plus 11 staff parking spaces together with further car parking to serve the extra care facility. Hence therefore Councillor Biggins' position is seeking to demonstrate the overall lack of parking to serve the development. Setting aside the parking provision of the medical centre, the report does not suggest that there is a lack of parking provision to serve the extra care facility. It should be noted that the issues of parking were raised previously by Councillor Biggins and discussed at length at the time by members of the Planning Committee in respect to the previous application on this site, which members resolved to approve having regard to the material planning considerations, including parking. At the outset, Shropshire Council do not have adopted parking standards, and indeed there are no overriding national parking standards at this time. It is a matter for planning authorities to consider the appropriate levels of development car parking provision in accordance with the National Planning Policy Framework, the NPPF. And therefore it is appropriate that parking provision for development is assessed based upon a number of factors, including the development type, its location, sustainability credentials and specific nature of the parking needs. The National Planning Policy Framework sets out in paragraph 105, if setting local parking standards for residential and non-residential development, policies should take into account A, the accessibility of the development, the type, mix and use of the development, C, the availability and opportunities of public transport, D, local car ownership, and C, the need to ensure an adequate provision of spaces for charging, plug-in and other ultra-low emission vehicles. Paragraph 106, maximum parking standards for residential and non-residential development should only be set where there is a clear and compelling justification that they are necessary for managing the local road network or for optimising the density of development in city and town centres and other locations that are well served by public transport. in accordance with Chapter 11 of the NPPF. Local authorities should seek to improve the quality of parking so that it is convenient, safe and secure, alongside measures to promote accessibility for pedestrians and cyclists. The NPPF sets out further in paragraph 108, in assessing sites that may be allocated for development in plans or specific applications for development, it should be ensured that A, appropriate opportunities to promote sustainable transport modes can be or have been taken up given the type of development and its location. B, safe and suitable access to the site can be achieved for all users. And C, any significant impact of the development on the transport network in terms of capacity and congestion, or on highway safety can be cost-effective mitigated to an acceptable degree. Paragraph 109 states that development should only be prevented or refused on highway grounds if there would be an unacceptable impact on highway safety or the residual cumulative impacts of the road on the road network would be severe. The NPPF is clear, therefore, that the cumulative impacts on the road network must be severe to warrant a refusal on highway grounds. In terms of accessibility, the site is situated relatively close to the town centre with good pedestrian connections. Whitchurch railway station is located approximately 1 kilometre to the north of the site. There is a bus stop in close proximity to the site at Doddington Lodge, which is served by Service 46 and 205. Service 205 is the town centre loop service, which is a 30-minute service stopping at 32 locations en route around Whitchurch and operates between the hours of 7:45 to 25 minutes past 2 in the afternoon, with no service on Sundays. The site therefore can be considered to have good sustainability credentials to promote travel to the site other than by the car. Councillor Biggins highlights 2 medical practices in Shropshire and a site granted permission in Telford and Wrekin in 2019, which all have parking provision higher than it is proposed at this Paul Moss site. In the case of the Telford and Wrekin application, the more recent one, they have adopted standards. In the case of a D1 use medical centre, they set out 3 parking spaces per consulting room. Interestingly, in respect of this recent Telford and Wrekin permission, no travel plan condition was imposed within the decision notice. Just bear with me a sec. Based upon Telford and Wrekin's parking standards as a neighbouring authority, the Paul's Moss site, this would suggest a parking requirement of 3 times 21, i.e. 63 parking spaces, plus 1 space per 2 staff, assumed to be 11 spaces. Using Telford and Wrekin standards being applied to the extra care home facility, this indicates a requirement of 1 space per 2 bedroom, plus 1 space per staff. If we take those figures together based on Telford and Wrekin's parking standards, this would indicate a parking requirement of 63 plus 11 plus 35 equals 109 parking spaces, plus additional spaces for the extra care staff number, which have not been provided. This would suggest a parking demand shortfall of some 26 spaces, with additional spaces for the extra care home staff. The above, however, should be considered a very robust position, as it assumes the 21 consulting rooms will be in use all of the time. The applicant suggests 10 consulting rooms being in use at any one time without any evidence to validate this, and we would perhaps accept a more robust position to assume 15 consulting rooms being in use, and therefore requirement, based on Telford and Wrekin standards, of 45 spaces, plus 11, plus the 35 spaces for the extra care facility. This therefore produces a parking level of 91 spaces, and therefore a shortfall of 8 spaces without accounting for staff associated with the extra care home. This, however, does not take account of the accessibility of the site and the sustainable travel to the site by walking, cycling, bus and rail. and therefore the potential to reduce car-borne travel. As set out in connection with a previous permitted scheme, there is a public car park located adjacent to Tesco's within a short distance, where there is an opportunity to encourage linked trips. To conclude, whilst the Highway Authority accept that, at times, the development would be likely to lead to on-street parking at peak periods, there is designated on-street parking lengths along Doddington Road adjacent to the site. The Highway Authority maintain its view that a highway objection based upon a lack of parking is not warranted. Is not warranted, or that the residual cumulative impacts on the local highway network would be severe as set out in paragraph 109 of the NPPF. In addition, the previous permitted scheme included 2 planning conditions as set out below in respect of the site's parking strategy and travel plan requirements. Chair, would you like me to read out those conditions, or?
I don't think they need to do that.
Oh, okay. Thank you.
Have you done them, Mark?
That's me finished, thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Mark, for your comprehensive answer to that. Philip, can I come back to you now?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Finally, one more addition to the updates, and this is in relation to the last item on the update sheet and the letter of objection received from Eleanor Cooper. Members will be aware of the officer advice circulated earlier today with regards open space issues, and for the public's benefit listening, I will summarise this to you. In the judicial proceedings relating to the previous grant of planning permission, the claimant advanced the argument that the prospective residents have a protected characteristic which engages the public sector equality duty, either age or in the alternative disability. As members will be aware from the officer's report, this is disputed. However, as an abundance of caution, members have been asked to consider whether the public sector equality duty would be satisfied in any event. To summarise the officer's advice, while the quantum of open space provided is less than required by policy MD2, the quality is greater than that would otherwise be provided. Thus, the provision of open space is a benefit of the proposal. Also, there is legitimate aim of providing better quality open space, which justifies, in this instance, reducing the quantum of open space. The claimant argues that any such view on this can only be reached through considering a number of factors. These are disputed. Members will be aware of the site and its constraints, and the fact that it forms part of the Whitchards Conservation Area, and that the mansion house on site is considered a non-designated heritage asset. Members' attention is drawn to the responses to the application from Historic England and the Council's Conservation Manager, as outlined in section 4.3 and 4.8 of the report respectively. These matters are discussed in section 6.2 of the officer's report. First slide, please. Application site is outlined in red on the overhead slide, and this indicates the area around the south, mainly residential to the north and east. Queen's Park is located to the south. Doddington Lodge Hotel to the east. The site is residential with Paulsmoss Court here outside the red line. These contain 14 dwelling units. Queen's Park is located where I'm pointing now. The Paul's Mosque house is here.
Chair, through you, it's Miranda Garrard speaking. If the planning officer could describe, because nobody can see where you're pointing in for the public or the members, you'll need to describe where you're indicating.
I was just about to say, Miranda, thank you very much. We can't see where you're indicating, Philip.
Right, sorry about that. The Paul's Moss house is located to the north of the site, alongside where there's a blue line. That indicates land in the applicant's control, but does not form part of this application. And then right at the bottom of the screen, you'll see some houses outside the red line. These are the Paul's Moss Court. On the eastern side, Doddington Court Lodge. Next slide, please. Next slide, please. Right, can we go back one, please? You've jumped ahead. Right, thank you. Right, this is the proposed site plan indicating the ground layout of the proposed development, which includes the retention of the Paul's Moss Mansion House I touched on earlier, which is to the top end of the slide. The proposal is for retention of this house, and then direct to the east will be the healthcare centre facility and extra care facility in the form of 71 apartment blocks over 3 floors to the south. I must also point out, as members will be aware from their previous site visits, how the land slopes from the mansion house down. Next slide, please. These indicate photographs of the existing site, indicating Paul's Moss House, which is indicated in the first slide, and the entrance to it. And then the next 3 are indicating existing buildings on site, which are proposed for demolition. The site is a brownfield site, and all buildings on site, other than the mansion house itself, are proposed for demolition. The second row of slides indicates the mansion house. It's considered a non-designated heritage asset and is located within the conservation area, to which the conservation area appears to be purposely drawn up to include this house within it. The fourth slide in the second row indicates again apartment blocks to be demolished, as does the third row, and in the final row again different viewpoints within the site. Next slide, please. As indicated earlier, it's to be the proposal for the extra care facility, that is the apartments, is to the south of the site, and these will be contained over 3 floors, the development as a whole. Next slide, please. This indicates a 3D view of the proposed elevations. That is with Paul's Moss House integrated into the proposed new development. Next slide. Again, further 3D views of the proposed elevations, and please note the integration of the Paul's Moss House, mansion house, which, as indicated, is to be refurbished as part of the proposed development. Also note the emphasis on open space. Next slide, please. Right. The application does provide for open space provision and landscape strategy, and the emphasis is on high quality open space provision, which includes a central plaza and courtyard. Members' attention on this matter is drawn to paragraphs 6.410 to 6.414 of the report, and I advise members take full note and consideration to the matters as discussed within these paragraphs. Members' attention is drawn to the consultee responses as outlined in the committee report, and the fact that none of the statutory consultees object to the application. Members' attention is specifically drawn to the response from Historic England, who have raised concerns, and also the response from the Council's conservation team, both of which are discussed further in the report. Members' attention is also drawn to the comments made by Whitchurch Town Council and caveats brought to officer and members' attention. All matters raised considered satisfactory by officers, and that includes reference to on-site parking and transportation matters as confirmed in accordance with the advice as contained within the report from the Highways Manager and his further response as part of this presentation. Please note that the representations to the application from members of the public as outlined in sections 4.13 and 4.14 of the report, as well as on the update sheet. Latterly, 3 areas of concern in relation to recent objections received, and these refer to impact on the dwellings at Paul's Moss Court, to which the applicants have submitted further information in the form of an impact assessment as part of the application. It's clear some residents of these dwellings are still not satisfied with the proposal as put forward. Highway and on-site parking issues and construction on site. Members will, of course, note the Council Highways Manager's no objection and is further discussion today during this presentation. Finally, concerns have been raised with regards to removal of internal fittings within Paul's Moss House. The internal fittings of the house are not protected, and quite rightly, the applicants have indicated they intend to preserve as much as they possibly can. The house is not a listed building. Its only designation is that it's a non-designated heritage asset located within the conservation area. And of course, there are further late representations, as I've already covered in the update sheet. In conclusion, taking into consideration the matters as discussed in the planning balance, as outlined in the officer's report, and the significant material considerations as discussed in the report, the merits of the proposal are considered acceptable, with no adverse impacts overall in relation to the surrounding conservation area and its historic features, including reference to the non-designated heritage asset, as well as the listed buildings in the surrounding area. The proposal is clearly in relation to healthcare and extra care provision, and while officers do not consider the open space provision complies with the criteria of policy MD2, it is considered adequate in terms of open space provision, and most importantly in terms of quality in relation to the end users, which are persons in need of extra care. This development offering further choice in living arrangements for members of the surrounding community, and members' attention is drawn to Appendix 1 and conditions 17, 18, 19 and 23 with regards to occupation of the extra care units provided on site. On balance, and with consideration to all the material considerations, it is considered that this application overall is in accordance with the local plan and the NPPF and section 72(1) of the Planning Listed Buildings and Conservation Areas Act 1990. Issues in relation to the Equality Act also considered acceptable. As such, the recommendation is approval delegated to Service Manager, subject to conditions as outlined in Appendix 1 attached to the report, with any modifications to these conditions, if considered necessary, by the Planning Service Manager. Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and that concludes my presentation on this application.
Chair Paul Wynne here. Thank you very much, Philip, for that comprehensive report. There are speakers, so if there are any public speakers on this matter, they will have submitted written statements to be read out in accordance with the revised procedure for public speaking. I will therefore ask the solicitor to read out any such statements. Thank you, Miranda.
Thank you, Chair. Miranda Garrod speaking. I have 5 statements here, and I will read them out in accordance with the usual order for public speaking, starting with the objectors, then the Town Council, then the adjacent ward member, then the local member, and then finally the applicant. The first submission is from Claire Bellingham on behalf of the Save Paul's Moss campaign group. She states, the Save Paul's Moss campaign group, today representing all other local objectors, is not anti-development. We believe in the objectives of the scheme to upgrade the health and social care facilities in Whitchurch, but do not accept that the developers' proposals are the most appropriate or most beneficial way for those objectives to be achieved. In particular, we are dismayed by the lack of usable open space on the site and ask the committee to be mindful of the current judicial review proceedings brought against the previous identical application. We maintain that if this too gains approval, then once more the Council's application of Policy MD2 is discriminatory and therefore unlawful. In light of the current health crisis and the terrible death toll from COVID-19 of those living in care settings, we urge the committee to look closely at these plans for Paul's Moss and ask whether building this kind of high-density, institutional style of accommodation for some of our more vulnerable residents is the most sensible housing solution. Should you not be encouraging Wrekin Housing Group to rethink their design of a single continuous apartment block housing over 100 people, accessing their homes through the same front door? In addition, is it truly wise to expect residents to share the bulk of the little amenity space available with those visiting a health centre? All over the world, architects and planners are learning lessons from the pandemic and looking at different ways of designing our future built environments. The decision you make today will impact on our town way into the future. We have fought the fight of our lives to first save our heritage, Paul's Moss House, and we are grateful to the Planning Authority for your role in preventing that needless destruction. But we couldn't stop there. Not only because our conservation area and the setting of Paul's Moss House will be greatly harmed by this incongruous development, but because we believe that the quality of life of our people will suffer, both that of the intended residents and that of those already living nearby. Please urge the developers to save the interior mahogany panelling, last original fireplace, decorative domed ceiling, original doors and other irreplaceable heritage so that it can remain Whitchurch's most extravagant public building, one that our council brought into the public domain for Whitchurch many years ago. Our campaign has not been about a battle of wills, a sour grapes attempt to thwart the ambitions of those we're at odds with. Would we really have spent thousands of hours and tens of thousands of pounds just to spite Wrekin and our local authority? We have made numerous attempts to engage with Wrekin Housing Group to try to broker a way forward and avoid litigation against Shropshire Council, but have been continually stonewalled. We have nothing to gain for ourselves from our actions. Everything we've done is because we care deeply about our town and those who live in it. If you too, our elected representatives, care as we do, then you will not grant permission for a development that so badly lets down the very place and people it is intended to serve. Better could be done and must be done, and it is for you now to see that it is. That's the end of that submission, Chair. The next is from the Chair of Whitchurch Town Council, Councillor Ruth Shepherd, and the submission reads as follows. Whitchurch Town Council Planning Committee held a discussion under the Council's scheme of delegation about the Paul's Moss planning application 20-01284 full on the Friday the 15th of May 2020. All councillors at this discussion agreed unanimously to support the application, caveated by the comments as have been previously provided through the planning portal in October 2019. The Council supports this application, which concerns only two issues, open spaces and an equality issue, making the following points. Whitchurch Town Council notes that open spaces were miscalculated in the original planning application and welcomes the applicant's assertion of the open spaces and amenity planting. Equalities issue has been addressed by virtue of this planning application for sheltered residential apartments. There is a bus stop outside the development within a short walk, which needs to be retained to promote sustainable transport connections. Whitchurch Town Council would like this made a condition of the development in line with NPPF Sustainable Transport advice. There is currently minimal parking space, and Whitchurch Town Council are aware of the challenge of parking locally and therefore hope the applicant would consider more parking. We note that the application meets Shropshire Council's planning policy and is delivering requirements of our town plan. The town plan was launched 9 years ago in 2011, having consulted all residents in the town, many of whom stated that a new health centre was a priority. The Council welcomes the continued commitment from Wrekin Housing Trust, NHS England and Shropshire Council in their investment to healthcare infrastructure and supported living for the elderly in the town. That's the end of that statement, Chair. The next statement is from the adjoining ward member, Councillor Thomas Biggins, and he writes, Mr Chairman, I support the new medical centre, as I have always done, and this is the third time that I have addressed this committee. Whitchurch Town Council and I are highlighting the inadequate car parking provision for patients and staff at the medical centre as a material planning consideration. As Shropshire Council does not have an adopted policy on car parking, I question the process that has been used to justify 35 spaces, brackets 24 patients and 11 staff. No consideration is made of the national guidelines that set out that there should be 4 car parking spaces for each consulting room. There are 21 consulting rooms, according to paragraph 5.1.2 of the Transport Assessment, which indicates a requirement for 84 car parking spaces, being 63 patients and 21 staff. So we have a chronic shortage of 49 spaces, which is 58% below D1 national guidelines. No consideration is made of comparable medical centre developments granted by Shropshire Council previously, e.g. Cleobury Mortimer, 64 spaces, and the planning reference is 13000429 full, and therefore offer a precedent, or neighbouring authorities, e.g. Shawbirch in Telford, which was 68 spaces. All we have in the officer's report in paragraph 4.11 is the statement that the medical facility holistically is assumed to require 51 spaces, with 36 being provided, a deficit of 15 spaces. The figure of 51 is arbitrary, and there is no process visible as to how this assumed requirement was calculated. In the officer's report, paragraph 4.11, it states, based upon 10 consulting rooms being in use at any one time, the transport assessment indicates a maximum parking demand of up to 36 spaces. The justification for 36 spaces, however, is based on a false assumption. Under national guidelines and good practice at other local authorities, the guidelines are that there should be 4 car parking spaces for each consulting room built, not a figure based on estimated usage. Another point has been totally missed, that the new medical centre is to serve 2 purposes. 1. To relocate the town's existing GP surgeries with practice nurses and admin staff into one location. And 2. More importantly, the NHS plans in addition that consultants from the PRH and RSH will hold outpatient clinics and bring more treatments to Whitchurch rather than Whitchurch people having to travel to Telford or Shrewsbury. That is why the application is for 21 consulting rooms and not 10, because the intention is to get usage of 21. No consideration or mention of these extra services has been made. In conclusion, I have also submitted a document that looks at the calculations in more detail, e.g. the travel plan is not COVID-19 compliant and provides calculations that the gross shortage of on-site car parking spaces will cause severe impact in the locality. I really want this facility, but I really want it to work and not become a parking nightmare. Since the first application, 1805901 full, was refused by this committee in 2019, extra time has been found to look at open space and adapt the house. Can we please now sort out the car parking? May I request that this application is deferred to the next meeting so that constructive work on remedying the car parking deficit can be undertaken by our officers and Wrekin Housing Trust. I note that we have one outstanding judicial review over open space. Do we really want another over car parking spaces? That's the end of Councillor Biggins' statement, Chair. The next statement I have is from Councillor Gerald Dakin as the ward member. And he writes, "Members, this is an application that has fundamentally had a great deal written about it, and many queries have been asked and answered about this. Before us is an excellent appraisal of the plan and has many comments from the regulated bodies, the majority of which are supportive. Whitchurch needs these facilities, and this is an excellent way of producing them. The 20-room combined doctor's surgery is very welcome and will help service the town and outlying districts for the foreseeable future. And the 71 extra care homes is exactly what is needed for the area, particularly with the pressure being put on private nursing homes. Also, I would wish to comment on open space, and although the space is smaller than usual, it is of the type required for the expected residents, and I believe quality is better than quantity in this instance. I have said the report is very comprehensive, and as the local member, and to save me going over the report again, I would ask you to give your full support to this application." Chair, the final submission is from the applicant Wrekin Housing Group in response, and they state, "This scheme is brought before the committee as one that is much needed in Whitchurch and will provide benefits to the wider community. The vast number of benefits arising from the scheme are set out in the officer's report at paragraphs 6.5.7 to 6.5.9. Importantly, there is desperate requirement for modern healthcare provision in Whitchurch to support the community, and there is no other project that can achieve that benefit at this time. The proposals are supported by the Town Council and much of the local community. There are no technical objections. As members will know, an identical scheme was approved in October 2019. These proposals are brought to deal with matters arising from a judicial review relating to open space and the Equality Act. Members should note that the impact on the historic environment has been considered and fully dealt with. Objectors were refused permission by the court to bring their claim on that point. Your officer's report is comprehensive. It explains at length why this proposal complies with local and national planning policy and addresses the Equality Act issue. It also goes into significant detail in respect of the open space. While we consider that sufficient open space at 32.4 square metres has been provided, as set out in drawing number 2361 SK 780, officers consider that the proposal offers less open space than is required by policy MD2 of the development plan. Nevertheless, the conclusion that the proposal offers better quality than would be required by policy MD2 is an important one. In particular, policy MD2 sets a generic target of open space to provide for play, recreation, formal or informal uses. Not all types of open space are appropriate in any particular development. In terms of open space for this project, it includes a mixture of paved terraces with seating, the public paved plaza which sits between Paulsmoss House and the new health centre, raised planting beds, grassed areas and numerous areas containing new trees and decorative planting. This will be a scheme that incorporates high quality open space with extensive communal areas that are designed to provide opportunities for residents to exercise and interact with each other and members of the public. The purpose of the open space is to encourage this interaction, to reduce isolation and provide a high quality environment. The proposals achieve that. As with any significant project, there are objections, but these are unfortunate given the extent and the nature of benefits that arise from this scheme, both for future residents and the community of Whitchurch. It is unfortunate that objectors would seek to use the current COVID-19 crisis to sway members. The extra care solution is far from institutional and provides independent living with support targeted for individuals' needs. The COVID-19 pandemic has demonstrated the benefit of this type of support, which takes pressure away from NHS services and gives people a better alternative to living in complete isolation. In respect of parking concerns, your officers and Highway Authority both agree that this proposal provides sufficient car parking provision on site to meet its current and future needs, particularly given that the site is close to the town centre and town centre car parks. A bus stop is located adjacent to the site along Doddington. Members are respectfully requested to continue to support this important and beneficial development and to approve the proposals. That's the final public speaking submission. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you very much, Miranda. Right, does the planning officers wish to clarify any points in response? Philip?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. No, I think it'd be interesting now to open the debate and reserve the right to comment if members request or if I feel appropriate after I've heard what they have to say.
Thank you. Right, I will now ask members of the committee for their comments. Please indicate on the chat function if you wish to speak. Please remember that when you ask to speak, members should unmute microphones, state their name and re-mute on completion. I'll kick off to start with Philip, if that's okay. Councillor Paul Wynne here, Chair. Can we have clarification on the bus stop? Is that is going to remain there because there's some question mark in one of the remarks there? We have clarification.
The bus stop is outside the application site, and I am not aware of it being removed as part of this application.
Thank you for that. Miranda, do we have any?
Yes, Chair, the first request is from Councillor Bardsley.
Thank you very much, Councillor Bardsley.
Thank you, Chair. These are questions for Mark Wootton primarily, but obviously other officers may well have views as well. I do share a lot of the concerns expressed by Councillor Tom Biggins. I can think of medical centres in Oswestry and in my own area in Baschurch where the car parking is woefully inadequate, and that causes considerable problems both for patients and indeed for the consultants, doctors and other staff who work there. Despite the fact, certainly in Oswestry with the Cambrian Medical Centre, there is public car parking nearby. So I enormously welcome the proposal for a travel plan. Now, forgive me, I don't know the details of that. My first question to Mark Wootton is the submitted travel plan, and I appreciate it's still there to be negotiated in detail. Has the medical centre, have the medical centre staff had an input into that, or is this just something from Brechin Housing Association? That's the first question.
I think to answer that, Councillor Barley, that has come from the applicant.
So we haven't had any input into this from the occupiers of the medical centre?
No, their travel patterns were indicated as part of their existing premises, where there was, I think in many cases, very little car parking provided. But obviously this application is to, in effect, group those three existing practices into one location.
Yeah, I mean it's accepted, isn't it, that there's going to be additional usage over and above the GP practices, with the very excellent proposal to bring consultant clinics out from our two principal hospitals. I mean, we can argue about, you know, how much additional car parking that's going to require, but it will certainly require some additional car parking. Otherwise, there's not much point in providing all the consulting rooms. Will the medical centre car parking be protected in some way, so that it's not just filled up with other people coming to the Paul's Moss development? I suppose that's the next big question.
Yeah, to come back on that point, Councillor Bardley, I think that's potentially covered, A, with the travel plan, but also with the car parking condition requiring a car parking management plan to be submitted and approved, which was included as part of the previous planning permission.
As Mark Wootton knows, I have some experience of travel plans and Section 106 agreements that go with them. And I'm just a bit puzzled that this doesn't have to be approved and, you know, for 2 years after the development. I mean, it seems to me something that should be in place, you know, well before the medical centre starts operating, because once people get into the habit of, you know, driving their car, and we all do it, I certainly do, when we could walk or go on the bus or whatever, it's going to be difficult to get them out of that. And I would have thought the GP practices, you know, there's presumably going to be a practice manager for the new medical centre, ought to be having a significant input into the travel plan negotiations, because if it's not right, they're the ones who are chiefly going to suffer. And forgive me, I think this was a point I've made before on an earlier application. Some patients actually will need to go by car. Somebody who, you know, has real mobility issues, you can't really expect them to get on the bus or park some distance away and then walk the last 400 or 500 yards. So it does seem to me that the travel plan is a very, very important part of this proposal. And, you know, I'd like some reassurance from Mark Wootton that this is going to have some real teeth in it.
To come back on that point, to say that the travel plan is at present, the wording of the condition requires the travel plan to be implemented in accordance with approved details for the lifetime of the development. And I think the sentence afterwards is a slight error in terms of the travel plan update effectively to be submitted on request, but no more than 2 years from the date of the development being first brought into use, and every 2 years thereafter. I suppose to come back in terms of the importance of the travel plan, we could look at that condition in terms of.
Oh, Mark.
Sorry.
Okay.
In terms of the travel plan requirement to be submitted and approved prior to the commencement of development.
That would be very reassuring, Chair. As I say, I'm not sure whether any members are familiar with the Cambrian Medical Centre car park. I mean, they're not on, you know, then it's not the same, of course, but that's a minor injuries unit, and you know, it can be absolutely hopelessly overcrowded, and it's very difficult for doctors to park there. Well, I don't think there was a travel plan there, and you know, it does seem to me that car parking arrangements around medical centres do need to be pretty rigorously enforced in some way or another. So I think Mark Wootton's proposal that the condition is strengthened to say that that travel plan must be in place earlier rather than later is extremely welcome, Chair.
Thank you, Councillor Bardsley.
Mr. Chair.
Sorry, yes.
Chair, through you, can I just comment on that, please?
Sir, Philip, yes.
I'd like members need to be aware the travel plan is referred to in condition number 20 attached to in Appendix 1. That travel plan detail was submitted as part of the application, to which officers, including highways, have looked into. And I must emphasise, we are now to encourage alternative means of transport. This site is in a highly sustainable location with regards alternative means of transport. That includes public transport as well as obviously taxis. However, I'll defer to members if they feel the wording of that condition does need amending, but I did need to highlight it to you so that you are aware and of the wording of that particular condition. Thank you.
Thank you, Philip. Going to Miranda now, has anybody indicated?
Yes, Chair. Councillor Vasma.
Thank you much. Councillor Vasma.
Thank you, Chair. I just want to ask about this this condition number 20 on page 99, and it's clear that the amendment which Mark Woodman was talking about was to bring it into operation earlier. Is that right? So we're talking about it coming into operation when the development is opened, and does with the reason given there in condition 20, that is to stay as well. Is that right?
Mark, can I come back to you on that, please?
I'm just trying to find out. I don't know if Philip can help me with the actual conditions set out in the report.
Okay.
I'm trying to find the report at the moment.
Give you a few seconds.
It's on page 99 of the in appendix 1, Mark.
Yeah, it's condition 20.
I'm just trying to get it up at the moment. My computer's getting very slow.
Would you like me to read it out to you, Mark?
That's fine, thank you.
Please, Philip.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Chair. Right, condition number 20 reads, the travel plan objectives shall be fully implemented in accordance with approved details for the lifetime of the development. The travel plan shall thereafter be submitted to Shropshire Council upon request, but no less than 2 years from the date that the development is first brought into use occupied, and every 2 years thereafter. And the reason states to minimise the use of the private car and promote the use of sustainable modes of transport. Thank you.
Thank you, Philip. Does that answer your question, Councillor Vesmere?
Yes, Chair. I just wanted to. I was thinking that the travel plan is coming into effect 2 years from the date of the development is first brought into use occupied. Why cannot it be come into operation when the site is first brought into use?
I'll swing that one over to Philip, please. Could you respond?
Right, thank you, Mr. Chair. Well, I'd like to emphasise the sentence does indicate upon request, but no less. So it isn't that it's 2 years. That's the maximum we would allow before we saw it. If we felt it was needed to be seen earlier, well, then we'd ask to see it.
Thank you. Yeah, I think that explains it. Is that okay, Councillor Vesmere?
So why can't we request it earlier than that? I mean, I know it's saying there's a limit there, but let's say why can't you say that it's going to be requested as soon as development's brought into operation?
Well, we can request it when the site is just open. We can request it if we want to.
Through you, Chair. That's exactly my understanding of the wording from Highways. If we felt on commencement of first use of the site, we need to see it. Well, then we would be able to.
But why can't you do that straight away? Why can't you do that? Why can't you specify that you request the travel plan be in operation when the development starts to be functional?
Philip? As far as
the conditions worded so that we could see it when the development is functional, but also it allows, if after we've seen it, there's concerns raised and we feel they're valid concerns, well, then we can review it again at a later date. So it's ongoing, and I think that's the key in this matter.
I think, Councillor Busby, it does cover it. They can ask for at any time, start, middle, end, whenever, for an update on it. So I think it covers it quite well. Is that okay?
Chair Nick Bardsley, may I just make a point?
Okay, Nick.
Well, just my experience of this sort of travel plan and a very different sort of development, I appreciate that, is that it takes quite a bit of negotiating, and frankly, the sooner you start, the better, because of course, different people want different things from the travel plan. You don't naturally reach agreement straight away, so it does seem to me that a fairly robust approach and an early tackling of some difficult issues, the sooner you start on it, the better.
I think Philip explained it. We can start straight away as soon as the site's open. What you're trying to say is can we get something in place before it opens?
Yeah, I mean, what I'm concerned about is that Mark Wootton said that the medical centre users of the new building haven't so far been consulted.
I didn't pick up on that personally, Councillor Bardsley.
Well, Mark could confirm or otherwise. That was my understanding, that this is just a proposal from Wrekin Housing Trust.
Mark, can you come back on that, or Philip?
Can I add? This is something that the Highways Authority have looked into on behalf of the council, with the information provided as part of the application. And I must emphasise, it's a town centre site, not edge of town or in open countryside, and we have to encourage alternative means of transport to the private motor car. This point is touched on in the reason attached to that condition. So what I'm saying is there is flexibility in the wording of that condition to ask for that travel plan, if it's not working to an acceptable standard.
I'm happy with that, but I'm not sure if Councillor Bardsley is or Vasmir is. Do you understand? Are you happy-ish with that? We can ask for it straight away as soon as it's open if we wish. See how it goes, then we can ask for it and ask for it again and again and again. So it's an open-end book as far as I can see, but if you disagree, right. Councillor Vasmir, what are your thoughts on that?
Well, could I propose that the travel plan, it says here, shall be submitted to Infrastructure Council upon request to come into operation at the time of the development when it's first brought into use? Something along, I can't word it off the top of my head, but something along the lines that the travel plan is negotiated before the actual development comes into operation, and is then subject to review. And I agree that it's very important it minimises the use of the private car, but that should be done so that it's operational from day one, surely.
I understand what you're saying, Councillor Vasmir. We'll take advice from Miranda on this in a bit, not quite straight away. We'll move on to any more questions to give the solicitor time to put something together. Any more indications about speaking, Miranda?
Yes, Chair, the next indication is from Councillor Hunt, and the Head of Planning Services is also indicated to make a comment after that.
Thank you very much, Councillor Hunt.
Thank you, Miranda. This formal meeting can be quite frustrating. However, listen, I think we're getting hung up on the devil's sometimes in the detail, but not in this case. I mean, you know, I think 20 is very clear. Wrekin Housing will be aware that we could ask for it the day they open, so it needs to be ready, and they would be extremely foolish if they didn't speak to officers about it, because if we weren't happy, we could put them in breach of the planning condition. So, you know, it is what it is. It's there. you know, it's chalk and cheese when you compare it with Oswestry, because the car park outside Oswestry is a private car park. I've been doing a significant amount of work on that, trying to sort that out for the residents and for Owen. It is a private car park. It's not charged use. It doesn't belong to the Cambrian Medical Centre, and that whole thing was a bit of a muck up when it was set up. I have to say, this is becoming a bit of a Groundhog Day thing for me. This is the third time now, you know, that this has come back, and this is substantially exactly the same as the one we've had before, which is currently under a JR. You know, do you know what? We can chase our tails round and round and round on this. You know, I think the concerns are fair, but the concerns are addressed by number 20 of the conditions. I'm actually going to propose that we go with the officer's recommendation and move forward with this.
Thank you, Councillor Hunt. We've still got some debating to go. Yeah, thank you for that. And next is, sorry, Miranda.
The Head of Planning Services, Ian Kilby, asked if he could speak.
Thank you very much, Ian. You'd like to come in, please?
Thank you, Chair. Can you hear me? It's Ian Kilby, Head of Planning.
Just speak a little bit, please, Ian.
Okay. Can you hear me now? It's Ian
yes,
Kilby.
we can. Thank you. Yeah.
Thank you. Just wanted to pick up on what Councillor Bardsley and Councillor Vasma were saying in relation to this condition. If we could assist with committee on that point. I don't see any reason why we couldn't frame the condition in a way that requires that travel plan to be developed in consultation with the relevant user groups. So that would include all those using the premise, so that we have the basis of something in place for when the site opens. I think what officers were trying to say is the travel plan is a living document that is reviewed over time. Some members will be familiar with, we had a travel plan in place for the football ground in Shrewsbury a number of years ago, and it was developed against anticipated travel patterns and levels, and it's modified over time in consultation with relevant user groups. So I suggest it might assist if we frame that condition in a way that requires that travel plan to be developed and submitted for consideration prior to the building being brought into use, and thereafter it can be requested for a periodic review as the site is used, because of course we are the purpose of the travel plan is to encourage sustainable patterns of travel, and at the moment we are working on what if and might be, and we are, you know, so the travel plan will direct a sustainable patterns of use, and then the point of it is that it can be reviewed to deal with any changes in those patterns. So I hope that's clear, and I just offer that as a way of trying to deal with the points raised by Councillors Bardsley and Vasma. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Ian, for that. Sorry, Miranda, yes.
I was just going to indicate the additional speakers, but if you were going to speak first, then that's fine.
No, I was just to say that's a good suggestion. Can we go back to Councillor Bardsley and Councillor Vasmere? If we do that, are they happy with that? Can we just have clarification there, please?
Yeah, thank you, Chair. Personally, what Ian Kilby has said seems to me to be eminently sensible. As I say, my experience elsewhere is that the sooner you get cracking on this, the better. Because people have conflicting interests, and it isn't something that's going to take 5 minutes. So I think the fact that it can be talked about now with a view to being in place before the development starts being operational, that's very welcome, very reassuring. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Bardsley. Councillor Vasmere.
Yes, David Asma here. Yes, I support what Ian Kilby suggested just now, and if that can be put into some sort of words and included in the proposal, I would propose that. Thank
you very much. Okay, just one statement by me. I was born in Whitchurch. I'm a Whitchurch man through and through. There is a doctor's surgery there now with no parking. They park on the side of the road, around the corner, etc., etc. There are places to park within the area, as there has been for years and years and years. I'll just make that statement because I am a local man to Whitchurch, lived on the outskirts all my life. So yes, right, Miranda. Next
Chair,
person.
it's a matter for you, but Councillor Barrow has asked to speak, but then Councillor Hunt, who'd made a proposal, has indicated that he would wish to take on board an additional suggestion, so he wants to comment on his proposal. So it's up to you how you take those, Chair.
Okay, thank you. Right, we'll go to Councillor Hunt first. Sorry, Councillor Barrow. Thank you, Vince.
Thank you, Councillor Hunt here. Yes, I as I indicated on the message board, I'm happy to take that on board. Yeah, I think Ian's proposal is as a way forward that would satisfy both councillors Bardley and Vasmere. I think is sensible. I think it's workable, and I'm happy to take that on board with my proposal. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Vince. Councillor Barrow.
Thank you, Chair. You remember at the first meeting when this came to committee, I actually voted for this then and was disappointed it didn't go through. I see this as huge benefit to the people of Whitchurch. I think the balance is better now than on that first application. And if Vince has proposed it, I would like to second his proposal, please.
Thank you, Councillor Barrow. Miranda, has anybody else indicated?
No, Chair, there are no more indications at present. I don't know if any of members haven't put in an indication. You might wish to ask them, but there are none on the chat.
Can we just double check? Does anybody want to speak? If there's no indications, no, it seems quite clear. So hang on a second, where am I? If there are no speakers, please do that. Yeah, okay. We will now take the vote. The solicitors will read out the names of the committee members present entitled to vote on this item and then confirm the results of the vote.
Thank you, Chair. Just briefly before I do that through you, Chair, I should just comment in response slightly to Councillor Barrow's last point, that while there is an existing planning consent, it is important that members do not use that as a material consideration. Obviously, we know that it's there and that you've considered it, but it isn't a material planning consideration in your consideration of this matter. That being said, I will now read out the names of the members for the vote. The proposal is in the officer's recommendation, but with that amendment to condition 20 as outlined by the planning services manager to you. So I will ask you if you are for or against. Councillor Wynne.
Definitely for.
Councillor Oldcroft.
Unreservedly for.
Councillor Bardsley.
For.
Councillor D.
For.
Councillor Green.
For.
Councillor Hunt.
For.
Councillor Mosley.
For.
Councillor Barrow.
For.
Councillor Vasmer.
For.
Chair, that is 9 members for. That is unanimous.
Thank you very much for that. So I confirm that has gone with the officer's recommendation for approval. Thank you very much. Moving on to item 9, appeals and appeal decisions. Do the planning officers or solicitors wish to make any comment on the appeals?
None from me, thank you, Chair.
Philip, have you got any comments?
No comment from me. It's everything is as set out in the agenda.
Thank you. Do any of the members wish to comment on the appeals? Otherwise, we can note them. No. Okay. Right. Item 10. To note that the next meeting of Northern Planning Committee will be held at 2 p.m. on Tuesday, the 23rd of June, 2020. Can I just say thank you all for taking part this afternoon. Good day to you all. Keep safe. Thank you.
Thank you all. Stay safe.